Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to explore the wonderful world of rectangles and rhombuses and squares. Oh my! So, here we go. You will need your notes and the shapes, the square, the rectangle, and the rhombus that I gave you in class, a pen and a pencil, and perhaps a calculator. All right, let's get started. First thing we're going to talk about today, ladies and gentlemen, is the wonderful rectangle. Now, there's some unique characteristics about the rectangle, so let's check them out. The first thing is the opposite sides are equal and parallel. So if we look at this, AB is congruent to CD. It is also parallel to one another. Now remember, our triangles means that those sides are parallel. They're never going to touch. They have the same slope. Also, BC is congruent to AD, and they are also parallel to each other. No, that wasn't. All right, so down here, if you want to, you can write AB is congruent to CD, and it is also parallel, and AD is congruent and parallel to BC. All right, another unique feature about the rectangle, is that all of our angles are 90 degrees, every single one of them. So all of our angles are 90 degrees. Also, the diagonals are equal in length. So what that means is AC, that whole segment there, is equal to BD. They're the exact same length. So if AC was 7, BD would also be 7. Last fun fact, the diagonals are bisected. That means that they're all going to be equal to each other. So if I gave this the point E, BE would be congruent to CE, which is also congruent to DE, which is also congruent to AE. So if I want to write that down, BE is congruent to CE, which is congruent to DE, which is congruent to AE. So those are some fun facts about our rectangle. Now we're going to move on. So make sure you have all of this written down and drawn in on your rectangle that I provided for you, okay? Now we're going to put on our rhombus. So make sure you have your rhombus out. We're going to do a whole bunch of information that goes with our rhombus. So first thing about our rhombus is that the sides are all congruent. So if I look at this, all 4 of my sides are congruent. They're all going to be the same measurement. So AB is congruent to BC, which is congruent to CD, which is congruent to AD. Okay? All of them are congruent, all 4 sides. Next fun fact about the rhombus is opposite angles are congruent. So if I look at this here, angle A is congruent to angle C, and angle D is congruent to angle B. So if you want to make sure you have that drawn into your picture, please. Okay, and make sure you're writing all of this down, very important. Consecutive angles are supplementary. Now we've already discussed this a few times. That means angles that are next to each other add up to 180. So one example I'm going to write down is measure of angle A plus the measure of angle D equals 180 degrees because they're right next to each other, so they're going to equal 180. Other ones would be DC. If you add those up, you're going to get 180. C plus B, you're going to get 180. And B plus A, you're going to get 180. Now, our diagonals are bisected. So that means that they are congruent. So if we look here, AE is congruent to CE, and BE is congruent to DE. And last but not least, the diagonals are intersecting to make 90 degrees, so they're perpendicular. So if we look at this, where they intersect right here at E, all of these angles are going to be 90 degrees. So all the way around this, we're going to have 90-degree angles where they're intersected. Okay? And one more, the diagonals bisect opposite angles. So what that means, bisect means cut in half. So if I'm looking right here at angle A, if I cut that in half, I have the measure of angle 5 is going to equal the measure of angle 6. I'm cutting the angle in half, so they're both going to be equal to each other. All right. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to lead you into a little story, so these next two slides don't write down, okay? The exciting news about the rectangle and the rhombus is that one day they met, and they fell in love, and they decided to get married. And once they were married for a few years, they decided to start a family, and along came their beautiful bouncing square boy named Square. Now Square, which we're going to learn about right now, also has a ton of unique features. So he got all of his things from the rectangle dad and the rhombus mom, and they created a square which brought their creativity together. So if we look at this, make sure you have this written down now. This whole slide needs to be written down. Have your square taped up here. We're going to talk about the square. The square has very unique things because you combine the rhombus and the rectangle together, we get the square. So, all sides are congruent on our square. We also know that opposite sides are parallel. So if we look at this, BC is going to be parallel to AD. AB is parallel to DC. So all sides are congruent and opposite sides are parallel. Now let's talk a little bit about their angles. All of their angles are 90 degrees. So that's one of the features that the square got from the rectangle. Also, since they're all 90 degrees, all the angles are the same. Okay, they're all congruent. And consecutive angles are supplementary. Okay, so all the angles 90 degrees, they're all the same, and consecutive, which means next to each other, are going to be adding up to 180. Now, the diagonals have some unique features. The diagonals are equal in length. So remember what that means is that segment AC, that whole thing, is equal to BD. They're the exact same length. Since that is true, we also know that the diagonals bisect each other. That means they're all congruent. So if I said this was E right here, B to E is congruent to C to E, which is congruent to D to E, which is congruent to A to E. They're all equal. Now, diagonals are intersecting to make 90 degrees. So once again, like the rhombus, if we have in here, all of these in here are going to equal 90 degrees. Okay, so where they meet, where the diagonals meet, they're going to create 90 degrees. All of them are perpendicular. Now, the diagonals bisect the opposite angles. So if I would look at A again like we did before, this is going to bisect, so it's going to cut into half. Well, we know it's 90, all of them are 90, so if I cut it in half, I'm going to get two 45-degree angles. Okay. All right, those are all the wonderful, unique characteristics of the square that are combining the rectangle and rhombus together. So make sure we have all this written down, please, ladies and gentlemen. Now I have one example for you today. So this is a square. I want to know the length of the side. So if we look at our square, one thing that we know about squares is that they are bisected. So this is going to equal the same length as this. So that means this whole length right here is going to be 14 centimeters. Our first goal is to figure out what the length of one side is. And we also know, since it's a square, that all sides are the same, so I can call this side x and this side x. Now, if we think back to the last chapter, we can use the Pythagorean theorem, which is x squared plus x squared is going to equal 7 squared. And we know we can use this because squares all have right angles. Okay, so x squared plus x squared is going to be 2x squared, which equals 140. Whoops, excuse me, 7 squared is, oh, sorry you guys, it shouldn't be 7 squared, it should be 14 squared, right? Because we're using the whole length. And 14 squared is 196. Now we're going to divide both sides by 2. So x squared equals 98. Now when we take the square root of both sides, we're going to round to the nearest tenth here. So x is going to equal 9.9 centimeters. Now, once we know that, they also say, okay, what is the area? Now, to find area of the square, area equals base times height. So my base and height are both going to be the same because all the sides are equal to each other. So area equals 9.9 times 9.9. The area of this square is going to be 98 centimeters because we're rounding to the nearest tenth. So centimeters, and then we can't forget squared. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is all I have for you today. Enjoy the wonderful, fabulous day ahead of you, and I'll be seeing you soon. Bye.